The grand hall shimmered under the golden glow of countless candles, their flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows on the ornate walls. Every surface glimmered with opulence, tapestries woven with gold thread, towering marble columns, and crystal chandeliers reflecting the gazes of the assembled nobility. And there she was, a girl no older than 12, stepping timidly onto the polished stone floor. Her dress, heavy with silk and lace, seemed almost a costume for someone decades older. Yet this was her reality, a princess, bound by the invisible chains of duty and power. Each step toward the altar echoed through the hall, met with murmurs of admiration, yet beneath the gilded expectation, her heart pounded with fear and confusion. Hands that should have held toys or books now clutched a bouquet she barely understood. Eyes that once chased sunlight across palace gardens now stared at faces filled with judgment, expectation, and the cold weight of politics. This was not a celebration of love, but a transaction of power. At 12, she was no longer just a child. She was a vessel for dynastic ambitions, a symbol of alliances forged by men who treated her youth as collateral. Courtiers whispered of treaties, crowns, and inheritances, oblivious to the girl shrinking beneath the layers of silk and responsibility. And as the officiant's voice filled the hall, solemn and unwavering, the tragedy was already written in the invisible lines around her eyes. A life accelerated, innocence stolen, and a year from now, a crown of grief would replace the fragile crown of youth. She would be a widow at 13, carrying sorrow far heavier than any child should bear, the haunting reminder that in royal courts, childhood was often the first casualty. Before the gilded halls and the weight of duty, she was simply a child. Her days had once been filled with laughter echoing through palace corridors, with the soft rustle of pages as she learned her letters, and the gentle warmth of sun on her cheeks as she played in secret gardens. Dolls and games, fleeting friendships, and whispered secrets defined her world, an innocent sanctuary shielded from the cruel calculations of power. Her tutors taught her history, etiquette, and the burdens of royalty, each lesson planting the seeds of expectation far beyond her years. While other children played in the freedom of youth, she memorized treaties and pledges, learning that her body and her future were not entirely her own. Every smile she offered to the world masked a growing awareness. Her life would be dictated not by desire, but by alliances and ambition. At 12, she was thrust into a reality no child should bear. The court, once a place of wonder, became a stage where she was both performer and property. The laughter of her peers faded into the distance, replaced by whispers of marriage contracts and dowries. The innocence she had carried so effortlessly was stripped away, leaving a hollow echo of the childhood that might have been. Even the simplest joys, the warmth of a friend's hand, the thrill of chasing butterflies, were traded for silk gowns and ceremonial obligations. Her youth, fleeting and precious, had been sacrificed to the machinery of dynastic politics. She had become a princess, yes, but at the cost of every tender, playful moment that childhood should have given her. Her marriage was never about love, affection, or choice. It was a calculated move on a chessboard far larger than herself. Dynasties shifted like tides, and alliances were forged with the precision of a master strategist. At 12, she became the centerpiece of a plan decades in the making, her small shoulders bearing the invisible weight of kingdoms and crowns. Courtiers whispered of treaties, of lands exchanged, and of promises etched in gold, while the girl herself was scarcely more than a footnote in the annals of power. Her groom, years older, was a man whose name was spoken with reverence and authority. To him, she was a symbol, a living seal on an agreement crafted by ambitious elders. The disparity in their ages, her youth against his experience, was invisible to the architects of their union, who cared little for the child's comfort or consent. She was a vessel through which dynastic ambitions flowed, a bargaining chip in negotiations that would determine borders, fortunes, and influence. Behind the closed doors of the palace, her individuality vanished. Every decision about her life had been made before she could even understand its consequences. Courtiers framed her future in terms of advantage. Who would benefit? What alliances would be strengthened? Which enemies subdued? In the quiet moments, she glimpsed the truth. Her body, her time, her very being belonged to the kingdom, not to herself. And yet, amidst the cold machinery of politics, there lingered a cruel irony. Though she was meant to unite realms and secure power, the girl at the heart of it all remained fragile, impressionable, and painfully aware of her own smallness. A princess by birth, but a pawn in reality. Her life was a transaction, her innocence collateral, and her name destined to be remembered not for who she was, but for what she represented. The grand festivities faded, leaving the princess alone in her chamber, the walls echoing with silence and expectation. The day's pomp, the hushed awe of courtiers, and the rigid smiles of her family had all led to this moment, a night that should have been private, yet felt like a stage where every glance, every breath, was judged. At 12, she was meant to step into adulthood, though her mind still clung to childhood's fleeting comfort. Her bedchamber, adorned with silks and soft candlelight, should have promised warmth and safety. Instead, it felt oppressive, a place where ceremony and obligation merged into quiet terror. She understood only fragments of what was expected of her, to fulfill duties she barely grasped, to obey a man she hardly knew, and to become the bridge between kingdoms she could not yet comprehend. The disparity between her youth and the responsibilities thrust upon her was stark, leaving her heart pounding with anxiety she could not articulate. Even as attendants closed the door, she felt the invisible weight of the court pressing down, a reminder that her body and presence belonged to the crown before herself. The groom, older and conditioned by years of expectation, carried none of her hesitation, embodying the social scripts written long before she was born. In that chamber, innocence and authority collided, leaving her suspended between child and symbol, between fear and duty. The night stretched endlessly, filled not with tenderness, but with the oppressive awareness that her life had irrevocably changed. She was no longer merely a girl. She was a princess, a wife, and an instrument of dynastic ambition, trapped between the fleeting echoes of childhood and the harsh reality of royal expectation. Barely 13, she awoke to a world transformed. The vibrant tapestry of life she had known, the laughter of companions, the delicate warmth of her childhood, had been replaced by a chilling silence. Her husband, the man whose presence had loomed large in her young world, was gone. Death had arrived swiftly, leaving her to navigate the vast emptiness of a life interrupted. In an instant, she became a widow, a label far too heavy for someone who still carried the echoes of childhood in her voice and the softness of youth in her hands. The court treated her with a mixture of pity and expectation. Mourning rituals, carefully prescribed by etiquette and tradition, enveloped her days. She wore grief as a garment heavier than any silk gown, her small frame bending under the invisible weight of obligation. Friends and relatives, themselves bound by protocol, seemed distant, offering comfort that could never reach the depths of her shock. Yet the cruelest burden was not the rituals, but the sudden awareness of her status. A widow at 13, she was now a figure of both sorrow and political significance. Every glance from the court reminded her that her youth was fleeting, her innocence further stolen. She had survived the first chapter of a life accelerated by duty and tragedy, but survival came at a cost. The world now saw her as an adult in the eyes of law and expectation, though inside, she remained a frightened child, grappling with a grief far too immense for her years. In the years that followed, the princess lived in a world that seemed to shrink around her. Her youth, already fractured by marriage and widowhood, was overshadowed by endless expectations and whispers of what she should become. The court, which had once celebrated her as a symbol of alliance, now viewed her as a fragile relic of tragedy. Isolation settled like a shadow, leaving her to navigate the corridors of power alone, a girl trapped in a woman's responsibilities. Pressure for remarriage hovered constantly, a reminder that her life was never her own. Advisors and relatives debated alliances, weighing her as a commodity, and every proposal carried the weight of dynastic ambition rather than personal happiness. The freedom to grow, to learn, to experience the simple joys of youth was denied to her. Her story, remarkable yet tragic, was quietly erased from the chronicles of grandeur, remembered only in footnotes and whispered accounts. Even as she moved through these years, the world around her remained unforgiving. Each day was a reminder of the fleeting childhood she had lost and the harsh adulthood thrust upon her. The luxuries and privileges of her station could not shield her from the psychological scars left by duty and grief. Her life, brief yet burdened, became a symbol of the darker side of royal politics. Innocence traded for power, childhood sacrificed for dynastic ambitions, and a young girl's identity consumed by expectation. Forgotten by history, yet emblematic of countless untold stories, her legacy is not measured in crowns or alliances, but in the quiet, haunting truth of a childhood stolen too soon. Her story, brief and heartrending, stands as a stark reminder of the costs hidden behind the grandeur of royalty. A life that should have been filled with laughter, play, and discovery was instead compressed into a series of obligations and tragedies. She was a child in years, yet forced to carry burdens far beyond her age, marriage, widowhood, and the unrelenting gaze of a court that saw her as a symbol rather than a human being. Each expectation placed upon her served the ambitions of others, leaving her own desires, fears, and dreams buried beneath the weight of dynastic politics. History, in its retelling, often glorifies crowns and alliances, yet rarely acknowledges the human cost of power. Her fleeting years illuminate a cruel truth. The mechanisms of royalty demanded sacrifices invisible in portraits and records. She was a bride at 12, a widow at 13, and in between, a girl whose innocence was surrendered to the machinery of ambition. The contrast between her youth and her imposed roles underscores a chilling reality. Childhood was a luxury that royalty often could not afford, particularly for daughters whose value was measured in alliances rather than affection. And yet, in remembering her, we confront more than a singular tragedy. Her life echoes countless untold stories of young girls thrust into adult worlds, silenced and forgotten by history. Her suffering, though personal, becomes universal, a reflection of the enduring tension between innocence and obligation, desire and duty. As viewers, we are left with a haunting awareness, a life lived in miniature, compressed by the demands of society, yet resonant with lessons for generations. Though the princess's name may have faded from popular memory, her story endures as a testament to the cost of power, the fragility of childhood, and the resilience required simply to survive. In her brief years, she bore the weight of a world she was never meant to carry, a reminder that behind every crown, there are untold human stories, waiting to be remembered.